Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Densel, and I host Unfound, and I run this YouTube channel. I realize you don't want to give a thumbs up to the following video until you watch it. You know what? That's totally understandable. I can appreciate that. But what you can do right now is subscribe to this channel. The button is right there. Thanks. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the monthly series Unfound. Now I am Unfound's host, Ed Densel. I hope everybody is having a great weekend. As the title suggests, I will be discussing the disappearance of Dana Smithers, who went missing from Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania on May 28th of 2022, so about 2 months ago. If you are new to Unfound now, I'm going to give you the reasons that I started this series over 2 years ago. Of course, number one is publicity. Any disappearance can benefit from publicity, of course, the unsolved ones. And this is an opportunity for myself to give some attention to disappearances that are very recent, something we don't do on the regular Friday podcast. Number two, we do this for educational purposes. As many of you know, in late 2021 and now into 2022, I've been going to major universities, speaking to criminal justice majors about disappearances, and I've begun to put together my own theories regarding disappearances, about how to look at them, how to analyze them, and how we may go about trying to solve them. So I get to express some of those theories in the disappearances that we cover on Unfound now. So it's educational for myself, and hopefully it's educational for all of you. And I think that's going to be the number one way that we here in the United States can get better at solving disappearances, because we know there are so many that are unsolved. And I happen to believe it's because there's a great misunderstanding regarding disappearances from both a publicity point of view, from a public point of view, and from a law enforcement point of view, and from a media point of view. So the second reason is education, trying to teach everybody, and I'm learning along the way myself. And then number three is I thought all of you might benefit from seeing how I react, how some of my assistants react, how some of the very, very knowledgeable listeners who now have been following Unfound for quite a while, how we react, what goes through our minds when we see a disappearance story for the first time. What are the points that we're looking for? What do we usually notice that is missing from a disappearance story? And this gives all of you a chance to maybe get inside our heads, in particular, my head. So we're going to be using in this particular video, or I am going to be using in this particular video, Dana Smithers' disappearance. Of course, publicity purposes. I, of course, hope that she is found alive and well today, tomorrow at the latest. But if she is not, maybe we can learn something from her disappearance and apply it to other disappearances that have already occurred and ones that are going to happen. So now I'm going to go to the map. Not a ton to show you on this map, unlike last month's disappearance of Dylan Rounds, but we're going to go through the map. I'm going to give you some facts about Dana, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you about the 3 learning points for this video. Number 1, disappearances are about people. Number 2, anything is possible after. And number 3, what's left behind. Those are the 3 learning points for this video. I will discuss them after this following map section. I'll be back in a moment. Okay, let's take a look at this map while I go through some of the facts regarding Dana and her disappearance. Dana's a 45-year-old, Stroudsburg, PA, and that is Stroudsburg, the downtown area, is what you're looking at on the screen right now. And May 28th, 2022, 2 months ago, that was a Saturday. So earlier in the day, she was at the Happy Hour Bar and Grill with friends. That is this location right down here at the bottom center of the screen. And I've not been able to find who she was with, just stated to be friends. And I don't know if one of those friends was this neighbor that we'll talk about in a moment. Just very unclear how they ended up all there together. Was it planned? Was it just an, by chance, by accident or something? I don't know if there was a special occasion. This would have been Memorial Day weekend, so maybe that had something to do with it. Just not sure, but that is where she was. But then at approximately 11 o'clock, and you can see that the Happy Hour Bar and Grill is not far from where Dana lived at 196 Stokes Avenue. In fact, let's just show how close that was by going to a walking route. And so to walk that, only 8 minutes. Very close. So maybe I'll just leave it on there. And of course, those gray lines are alternate routes. So at approximately 11 o'clock, I don't, seemingly for no reason, that doesn't mean there wasn't a reason, but no reason that has been made publicly, she went down to a neighbor's house only a few doors down, maybe this way, maybe this way. This is how Stokes Avenue, this is Stokes Avenue right here. Just a few doors down, one way or the other. Dana ends up there, at least publicly. There's nothing saying that this neighbor was surprised. Did Dana call ahead? I've not been able to find anything regarding that. It seems like Dana just kind of showed up. Maybe seems a little weird to me, given that it was an 11 o'clock at night, but maybe not. I don't know. But she shows up. They speak for a few minutes. There's no public information as to what this talk was. And then the friend said that Dana left, and that was verified by a doorbell camera that was on this neighbor's house. And it showed Dana leaving, and it showed that she had her phone and that she was putting it in her pocket. So she's somewhere on this street, and then seemingly she decides she's here for a few minutes. She decides to leave and walk home. There's nothing that, once again, this is a comment I've said before, nothing that in the public sphere that says that Dana was troubled. There was no signs there was an argument. There's nothing that this neighbor said, oh yeah, she was acting strangely. Nothing like that. She came down, spoke for a few minutes, and then left. So that was on that Saturday night, once again, May 28th, 2022. Well, it wasn't until Tuesday, June 1st, 2022, that Dana was reported missing by her sister. Could this have been because Dana missed her job or something? I suppose that's possible. Comments that have been written stating that she would have never left her daughters and her granddaughter. Last time that she was seen, she was in a good mood. In fact, Dana had made plans for the summer. And so everybody's thinking, she had no signs of walking off on her own, seemingly. So her house, once again, this is this address right here, 196 Stokes Avenue in Stroudsburg. She presumably lived alone, but what is unclear to me, wasn't able to find out when they went to her house to find out she was there. Maybe they're thinking, did something happen to her? Did she have a heart attack? Did she commit suicide inside the house? But there's no news out there. Was the house locked? Wasn't it locked? No idea. But somehow somebody was able to get into the house here at 196 Stokes Avenue. Nothing was amiss, no signs of violence. Her purse and medication were there, and probably most importantly, her phone was there. And remember, she had her phone when she was at the neighbor's place, so it seems that she actually did make it back to her house, that she was not, let's just say, attacked on the way, abducted or anything like that. However, I am open to the idea maybe she had more than one phone. That's always a possibility. But I've not seen anything stating that people believe that. So we're just going to assume that the house that was found at 196 Stokes Avenue on June 1st was the same phone she had when she was at the neighbor's. Now, there were no sightings of her that I could find, just to kind of change this over to what we might call a satellite view with actual pictures. You know, houses fairly close together. I wouldn't say necessarily a suburb, kind of somewhere in between. Some houses, but obviously some woods, and we'll get into that in a second. But certainly a populated area, but no one had any sightings of her on that Saturday night. Let's just say she walked off by herself. Cars going through this grid in here. Nobody stating, at least publicly, that, yes, I saw Dana walking this direction. I saw her walking on Stokes Avenue. I saw her walking on Colbert Street or Broad Street. I've not been able to find anything like that. And plus, you know how I feel about eyewitness accounts anyway. So searches were done, and this is where I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to presume that they went over, there's a Glen Park over here, and there are 2 creeks in the area. If I really want to zoom this out, there's a creek in here and one over there that ultimately lead to the Delaware River, which is over on this side of the picture. And of course, when I think about the Delaware River, I think about the disappearance of Ben Archer, who went missing, last being seen next to the Delaware River, but that was not in Pennsylvania. That was down in Delaware. But, you know, just looking at this, man, do I see a lot of trees. Even though this was, you know, I've zoomed out quite a bit now, but just to the south and to the east, you have a lot of areas that I'm sure are very tough to search. I'm not saying they didn't try to search them. I'm sure they tried to give it their best shot. But when I start seeing area like this in here, I get concerned about how high a quality of search it could have been. Just something to think about. Very well could be that that area has nothing to do with her disappearance. But you have to take a look at it. As far as an electronic trail, nothing of regarding her phone records, and being that her phone was found at her house, there's not probably going to be any helpful ping information there. Probably the last ping happened right at her house. And no information regarding any social media, if she even had any social media accounts. I think something else that we need to understand, and I'll get into this a little bit later when we get to the points of learning, is that we can't take for granted that she disappeared on Saturday night. It very well could be that, being that she seemed to be living alone, she could have disappeared on Sunday. Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Sunday night. We should not take for granted that she disappeared on Saturday night. Yes, nobody spoke to her on Sunday, but as a person myself who lives alone, and and most of work I do on the phone, it's certainly not unusual for anybody to not hear from me during the course of a day. 24 hours, 36 hours. I'm at home, I'm doing my work, I'm doing other things. And that very well could be the situation with Dana. Don't take for granted that she disappeared on that Saturday night or early Sunday morning. Could have been as late as Monday morning. Have to keep that in mind. So that is what I see. That's the information with the map. That is what I see here. Once again, my big concern is that all of this wooded area to the south and east of where she was living. That doesn't mean she walked off, but if she was right in the middle of New York City or Houston or something, and this happened, then we might be thinking differently about this particular disappearance. But being that her house was right on the edge of some wild nature area, that has to certainly be taken into account. Okay, let's get back to those points of learning, and then this video will be done. And we are back. Before I get into those learning points for this video, I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel right now. And if you're feeling even more energetic, you really like what we're doing here on this YouTube channel, please consider joining, which is the join button right below my face here. And for the low price of 10 cents a day, you can get some cool stuff that all the other people are not getting. Just hit the join button. You will see what you will be receiving. Just hitting the join button does not automatically enlist you as a member, but hitting the join button, it'll tell you first what you'll be getting for 10 cents a day. So please consider doing that. Also, we have a Patreon account, patreon.com/Unfound podcast of a variety of levels, depending on your financial circumstances. So check that out. And then we also have a PayPal account, paypal.me/Unfound podcast. All right, those points of learning that I delineated before we did the map section, of course, they are: disappearances are about people, anything is possible after, and number 3, what's left behind. And I'm going to talk about them in that order. And if you see me looking off to my left or right, I do not do these videos off the top of my head. So I need my notes that are on my laptop over here. But most of the time, I think I look at the camera. So number 1, disappearances are about people. This is not a cliche. This is not something like you might hear a corporation say, well, our corporation is really about the people, and we all know that they're just saying that. Really, corporations are about making money. Whereas I'm here to tell you that disappearances are about people. And what I mean by that is, certainly when we talk about locations, like I did with the maps, with the map section of this video, like I've done on most of the Unfound Now videos, when we talk about social media, what they were posting to social media, when we talk about phone data, ping data from the phone, anything like that, video, maybe we have some video of a missing person, that's all important, but you have to understand that is all helpful in solving the disappearance. But when it comes to understanding the disappearance, we have to know as much as we can about that person, even going well back before that person went missing. Having covered 260 disappearances at this point, almost 6 years into Unfound's existence, I cannot stress that enough. And so that is certainly the situation with Dana Smithers. We have to understand these people. What are the choices these people are making? What are their jobs, their relationships, their personalities? Do they have addictions? This, that? Because in the end, most of the time, that is what disappearances are about. We can talk about all the facts and circumstances. We can theorize till the cows come home. But really, disappearances are about those people who went missing. And it's got to the point for me where I don't necessarily even need to know what the circumstances are, like the date, the location, phone information. If you just tell me about a person, what the person's job is, a woman's job is, what kind of relationship she's in, does she have children, does she have any addictions, those things like that, and pretty much I'll be able to narrow what happened to her if she is missing down to a couple different choices and probably be pretty close to correct, without knowing if she had a phone, whether she had social media accounts, whatever else. Although, we do talk about those things both on Unfound Now and in the regular podcast episodes. Disappearances in the end are about the people, the choices those people are making. And just to give you some examples from Unfound's history, we have Crystal Morrison. She was sick the day she went missing. She was underweight because she was a former addict, and she died from the elements. She called for a ride and wasn't there when the ride showed up, and it turned out that she died from the elements on private land. She walked away from her job. Tiffany Johnson. If you would have told me that she had just gotten out of a relationship and that the guy was stalking her, right away, I think we could pretty much guess what happened to her. And that's pretty much what did happen to her, even though her remains have not been found yet, although the guy that was stalking her, her ex-boyfriend, is now in jail for her kidnapping, even though her remains have not been found. And then this is a Canadian disappearance of Ashley Simpson. Just tell me that she was living with some new guy and that he was being very controlling of her. Once again, you can jump to some conclusions maybe a little too quickly, but in this circumstance, you'd be right. And in fact, her remains were found, and this new guy that was in her life has now been charged with her murder in Canada. So just knowing those things, once again, we don't have to talk about the date, any phone information, location, nothing. Just enough to know that a person has an addiction or is in some relationship that might have been volatile, things like that is enough to really, really narrow the choices down. Now, what does this mean for Dana Smithers' disappearance? My concern is this, and I've done this for every disappearance pretty much that I've covered, both on the for the podcast and on Unfound now. I do look up the missing person's history. Criminal history, have they ever filed for bankruptcy, anything like that, because once again, that can tell you a lot about the person. And here's what I see regarding Dana. She was having money problems in her life. Maybe I'm making this public for the first time, and I'm not here to blame the victim or anything like that, but we need to understand these people so that we can understand their disappearances, because who knows where that may lead us. The fact is that Dana got charged with theft in both 2016 and 2017, merchandise theft, just 5 years ago. Now, I couldn't find anything recently from 2022, 2021, 2020, but I also know that this database that I use for this sometimes misses things. I know that for a fact. So here's a woman, 45, at least at that time, 40 years old. She's stealing. So what could that tell us? Maybe she was having money problems. Maybe she was, a kleptomaniac? Maybe that too, maybe some sort of mental issue going on with that. But I have to also be open to the idea, did she have some sort of addiction? We know that addicts do steal things from department stores, from convenience stores, from their own families. There's nothing in the public sphere that says that she had an addiction, but it certainly is in the public sphere that she did have some theft problems. So could this have something to do with her disappearance? It could, and it's something that we must consider. But also, I also read somewhere, though, that when she was out earlier that day at this happy hour place, was an ex-boyfriend there, an ex-boyfriend or ex-husband? Had she been married before? Or some guy that was in a relationship with her? This is also something that we should consider when we look at her disappearance. Both of those things are very, very important. So I'm also wondering, though, about the father of her children. Nothing in the public sphere regarding where this guy lived. These two still have contact. Did they still meet up once in a while? These are things we still don't know about Dana that could certainly help us understand her disappearance better, certainly. So moving on to number 2. And the point is, anything is possible after. And this goes back to something I was talking about recently regarding video. Yes, it can be very important for disappearances. However, what I also know is that as soon as that person goes off the video, off the screen this way, off the screen that way, whether the person is in a car or whatever, anything is possible. And so I've come to the conclusion, unless video, for example, we don't have video in Dana's disappearance, but I'll get to that in a moment. Unless we actually on video see that person getting into somebody's car or see that person jumping off a bridge or something, pretty much for the most part, video is going to be useless. Why? Because anything can happen after the person leaves the screen, unless it actually shows a crime being committed or an incident on screen. It's the same way with disappearances that don't have any video at all. And I think of something from the investment world. It say prior results do not predict future returns. It's the same thing with people. Just because a person has acted the same way for years and years and years does not mean that that person is going to act that same way in the next minute, next hour, next day, next week. It doesn't mean anything. So, being that Dana was over at her neighbor's, and even if they had the best conversation in the world, that does not mean that Dana couldn't have gone home, dropped her phone off there, and walked into the woods and committed suicide somewhere. I'm not saying that happened. But just because she's down at the neighbor's and had this great conversation doesn't mean she couldn't have committed suicide or walked out of her life or anything like that. There's no causation or correlation there at all that I've ever seen in any disappearance. We also have to look at ourselves regarding this, is that we often make sudden decisions. Now, all of us are still here. We haven't gone missing, but many times, sometimes we just decide to jump in the car and go somewhere just because we feel like doing that. So being that we know that we do that, we also have to believe that that's possible for people who go missing, even if it is probably under much more drastic circumstances. So we make these, we have to ask ourselves, why do we rule this out? So many times we, or at least I see in disappearances, well, she would have never left her kids. He would have never left her kids. But we know parents are doing that, for example, all the time. And we all know ourselves. I don't have any kids, but probably some people watching this, maybe some of you were married, you got divorced, and you left your kids behind. So this is happening all the time, and it doesn't have anything to do with disappearances. So we have to remember this is also possible with disappearances. And some examples from Unfound's history, Devon Bond. Unfortunately, this young man was found. He committed suicide. And there was nothing leading up to this that anybody would have ever thought that he would do that. But he did, and it took a couple years for his remains to be discovered, and they were not that far away from where he was living with his parents. Kevin Newen, this is a disappearance where he was at a bar, he called for a ride, the ride showed up, he wasn't there, but there is video that he walked off after calling for that ride. How do we rationalize that? How does somebody call for a ride and then leave before the ride gets there? It seems to make no sense, but it happens. We've covered a few disappearances like that for Unfound. Jesse Ross from Illinois walked out right in the middle of a convention, never to be seen again. No reason for why he left that convention room. We still don't know. It's a disappearance that's, well, it's getting almost to be 20 years old. Jackie Cooper. She was a married woman who was running off with a coworker who was certainly a serial killer. Here's a woman married, I think, at least 2 children, maybe 3, and she just decided she was going to leave her husband and children behind and run off with this guy because he gave her a good story. And he surely ended up killing her. How do we rationalize that? And then Audrey Herron, she goes missing on the way home from work. We still don't know what happened there, but once again, anything can happen at any time. Maybe she got carjacked. Maybe she ran off the road. Maybe she really did get home and her husband did something to her. But just because she had a great day at work doesn't mean she couldn't go missing hours later. So we have to think about that regarding Dana's disappearance. So just because she was out with friends, just because she went down to speak to a neighbor, really in the disappearance world, really doesn't mean much. Still, anything could have happened. And then number 3, what's left behind? And this goes to when a person goes missing and then somebody, the police, a relative, a friend goes over to the house to go inside, what should we be concentrating on? Those possessions that are missing and those possessions that are there. Now, of course, for women, it's purse and phone, maybe some other things. Them being there or not being there is always important. Whether they're there or not there could lead us in a couple different directions. Of course, for men, it's maybe going to be wallet, phone. For both genders, maybe car keys, things like that. However, you have to understand whether those items are there or not does not necessarily mean that foul play occurred. I'll get into that in a moment. Regarding if a woman, you have to think of it this way. This is how men and women's disappearances are different. Surely a woman could be attacked. Let's just talk about Dana. Surely she could have been attacked on the way home that night, taken to her house, the phone is left there, and then she's taken away. Surely. On the other hand, it surely could have happened that she went home, left her phone there, and walked off all by herself. All the facts as we know them would be the same, but one could point to foul play, one could be the totally the opposite. It's very, very complicated. And that's why it goes back to understanding that person probably helps more than any sort of the facts that you're going to be able to collect. And likewise, if stuff is not left behind, that could point to foul play. It could not point to foul play. Say somebody went over to Dana's house and her purse is gone, her phone's gone, maybe her car keys are gone, maybe even her car is gone. Might think that she drove off. She could have been carjacked. Maybe she wasn't carjacked. It's just hard to say. Hard to say. So we should never jump to any conclusions necessarily. Now I will tell you, just in general, when somebody leaves his or her phone behind, I generally think it's bad news, that it might have been foul play. But there is really no hard and fast rule regarding this. But why do I think that? Why do maybe many of you think that? Because we know how we take our phones everywhere. Now, some examples from Unfound's catalog: Rosemary Rapp. Everything was left behind. Clothes, phone, purse, car, keys, everything. But her husband said, yeah, she just took off and I don't know what happened to her. Now, nobody believes that. But there are other things in there besides her possessions being there that factor in, especially given how her husband reacted to that. Now, Brenda Sika, for her, now she had some drug issues going on. She was living in a hotel, seemingly being paid for by another guy who is now deceased. But everything she had was left behind. However, given who she was, it's much less chance of foul play, once again, because understanding who Brenda was, in contrast to understanding who Rosemary Rapp was. Dorianne Myers. Everything was taken or burned. Her house was burned, wasn't burned to the ground, it was just gutted. Her car was found 80 miles away, it was burned. Surely signs of foul play. But then on the other hand, Mary Jane Van Gilder, this is a disappearance that goes back to the 1940s. Nothing of hers was left behind, but I'm not sure anybody believes there was foul play. So it just depends. I'm going to keep saying that you have to really, once again, look at that person, look what was left behind, look at things that weren't left behind, and try to see if it all makes sense, because you can't jump to conclusions for any of it. Now, with Dana's phone being left at home, all it really proves is that the phone somehow made it from the neighbors back to Dana's house. It doesn't mean that Dana put it there. It doesn't mean that somebody else didn't put it there. It doesn't mean there was foul play. It doesn't mean that there was foul play. It's just the way it goes. And that's how sometimes how vague and nebulous disappearances can be. Now, my analysis is that Dana Smithers might have been in a darker place in her life than her friends believed. It seems weird to me, once again, my experience from 260 disappearances, that you have a woman who obviously had some theft charges within the last 5 years. She also had some marijuana charges going back to 20 years ago. I don't know how that would figure into this, but it seems weird to me. My perception is that she showed up at this neighbor's house at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. Maybe that was common for Dana. Maybe it wasn't. It would be nice if we knew a little bit more about that, but it seems strange to me. We don't have any news as to what they talked about, which also seems odd to me. This neighbor has spoken to the media. I've seen this person quoted, and still this person hasn't said what the conversation was. Seems weird to me. It's certainly possible that she got attacked. A woman walking by herself out late at night, certainly possible. The wrong person comes by at that particular time. It's only 3 houses down, but still anything's possible. But I have to tell you, but when people or women are attacked at home by someone who doesn't live in the home, there is usually evidence. We can look at a disappearance like Linda K. Carroll. We can look at Jody Huisentruit, where there were obvious signs of violence, that they were attacked at their house or their apartment or near it. These women living by themselves. Dana living by herself, you would think if somebody did come up to the house or something, that there would be signs of violence. There would be signs that she put up a fight. There's nothing like that. And on top of that, how would that person know that she was there alone? This would maybe infer that maybe somebody who knew Dana. But I can just tell you in general, when women are attacked at home, and it's by someone who doesn't live at the home, there's usually evidence of that. So Dorian Myers, once again, Jody Huisentruit, Linda K. Carroll. And we have no signs of violence. And I've started this 2-pronged test I've been talking about like the last couple months, where to think that there was foul play, it either has to be signs of foul play or an ominous fact, something that surely shows that somebody else was in the house or somebody else was driving the car, something like that. Or something like that. Or there's somebody telling, the part 2 of the 2-pronged test is somebody's telling crazy stories, but the person is not on drugs or not high or anything like that. I always have to make that stipulation. And we don't have any of that in Dana Smithers' disappearance. And we're 2 months in. And that surely tells me something as well. So I ask all of you to think about all of those points, the learning points, and my analysis as you maybe continue to follow any news regarding Dana's disappearance. I, of course, hope she is found today alive, tomorrow at the latest. But my experience also tells me when we get to 2 months into a disappearance, it's amazing how if a person isn't found dead or alive in that first month, how that disappearance probably is going to go for several months, if not to a year and beyond. That's my perception. So I appreciate you watching this episode of Unfound Now, where I discussed the disappearance of Dana Smithers from Stroudsburg, PA on May 28th of 2022. Thanks for watching.